If one day you were sitting in a chair and watched one of the videos of astronauts on the International Space Station floating in space and doing some acrobatic movements, so you say to yourself, "That's cool, I want to become an astronaut." Well, you are completely wrong, and I will tell you why. Exploration is one of human natures, which has shaped our present today with all the progress and development we are witnessing. And the dream of space exploration was the craziest dream, and it needed people who were geniuses and crazy enough to believe that this dream could be implemented. Scientists, engineers, and astronauts, like Yuri Gagarin, who was the first person to ascend into outer space. Not only that, but he was the first person to experience zero gravity and free fall without ending up as scrambled eggs. On September 12, 1962, in the midst of the Cold War, the space race began when President John Kennedy announced that the United States of America was seeking to send astronauts to the moon in response to the Soviet Union and the flight of Yuri Gagarin. And he said his famous words, "We chose to go there not because it is easy, but because it is hard." After years of research and a great effort by scientists, engineers, and astronauts, and experiments during which people were injured and some people even died to achieve this goal, and after delaying the launch date more than once, the efforts of the United States of America succeeded and the Apollo 11 mission to the moon was launched. Once the spacecraft reaches the moon, the lunar module separates from the command module and lands on the moon's surface with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong in it. And they received most of the praise, especially Neil Armstrong, who was the first human to step on the moon. As the years passed and space research progressed, many countries began to establish their own space programs, such as China, India, European countries, and others. Although there are many space agencies, they rarely open their doors to appoint new members as astronauts. But after a long wait, one of the agencies opens its doors for applications. And you rush there and find yourself waiting in a long line with about 18,000 other applicants. Just like what happened in 2016 at NASA. Only a small number of applicants are accepted as candidates for the tests, and the rest are rejected, and you may be among those rejected. But if a miracle happens and you are accepted, you will be subjected to a series of precise mental, physical, and psychological tests. For example, there is a set of physical tests that are performed on the candidate, such as blood pressure, heart rate, fitness tests, and others to ensure that your health is very good. As well as height tests to be suitable for the spacesuit, and certainly eyesight tests. Look at the board. What board? The board on the wall. Is there a wall too? In addition to the fact that one of the conditions for acceptance as a candidate is that you must be highly educated, there are several mental and scientific tests to ensure the candidate's ability to solve problems. So you must develop your knowledge in mathematics, physics, engineering, and computer science. Also, one of the important conditions for accepting candidates is that they must have at least 3 years of flying experience or 1,000 hours of flying an aircraft. And if we assume that you passed all of these tests, you will still have the psychological tests. Each space agency has a set of psychological tests for candidates to determine some personal qualities such as patience, emotional stability, and the ability to cooperate to solve problems. And these qualities cannot be known from the personal interview alone. For example, the Japanese Space Agency selects 10 candidates, locks them up for a week in an isolated facility, and subjects them to strange tests. They ask them to make 1,000 origami papers in the shape of a bird and tie these shapes together with a long thread. These origami shapes are sent in boxes to psychiatrists to analyze them and determine which of the candidates continued to perform the task with the same efficiency and which of them rushed and the quality of their work decreased over time. All of these are important factors in selecting astronauts because in long space flights, every task in the flight is repeated, and it becomes a boring routine task. Another test conducted by the Japanese Space Agency on candidates is disrupting the bathroom or delaying serving food. NASA would sometimes telephone candidates at late hours and summon them to see their reaction, and whether they would show up quickly or argue and be late. This showed some qualities of seriousness and responsibility. And if you pass all of these tests, you may be rejected for a strange reason, such as that you snore while sleeping. This may be very annoying for your crew and lead to poor sleep quality during the mission, which in turn affects concentration. After you pass these tests and say to yourself, "Finally, I will rest a little," I am sorry to tell you that it is only the beginning. You have now become a trainee as an astronaut and will enter an intensive training program on flying airplanes, submerging underwater to practice in zero gravity to carry out certain missions, training on using computer programs designated for missions, and training on the flight simulator at NASA for long periods of time, and lots of other exercises. Now that you have finished your training, I can say congratulations to you. You have officially become an astronaut, and you will be chosen to carry out your first mission and go into space. This is where the real danger begins. Despite scientific progress and our great success in most space missions, not all missions succeed. Any small mistake could lead to catastrophic results. We have seen missiles explode in the air before, such as the tragic Challenger mission. Elon Musk had 2 rockets explode before he succeeded the 3rd time. Another example of this is what happened on the Apollo 13 mission, when the team was surprised by a huge explosion during the flight, and astronaut Jim Lovell said his terrifying sentence, "Houston, we have a problem." This explosion was for the oxygen tank that they would be breathing throughout the trip, and now it has exploded. Fortunately, they had enough oxygen until they returned, but the biggest problem was their inability to get rid of carbon dioxide. But the command center on Earth managed the crisis well and were able to come up with a solution to the problem. When investigating this matter, it became clear that what happened was not the result of one reason, but rather several reasons that led to the problem occurring. Fortunately, the problem was solved, and the spacecraft and those on it returned to Earth safely. But this was not always the case. For example, on April 23, 1967, the Soviet Union decided to conduct a space maneuver in which it would launch a spacecraft containing astronaut Vladimir Komarov, and then launch another spacecraft containing 3 astronauts. At a certain altitude, the 2 spacecraft will connect together, and 2 of the 3 astronauts will head to the first spacecraft, then the 2 spacecraft will separate and return to Earth. But before the mission was launched, when Komarov and backup astronaut Yuri Gagarin checked the spacecraft, it was found that there were more than 200 malfunctions. But because they were in the Soviet Union and in the middle of a Cold War and a space race, the mission had to be carried out. Therefore, the first spacecraft was launched, and from here, the disaster began. The first problem that occurred was with the solar panels, so the spacecraft lost half its power. And because of this malfunction, the rest of the mission was stopped, and Major Komarov was left trying to solve the problems. And every time he finished one problem, another problem appeared. But with unparalleled skill, he was able to solve all the problems and successfully direct the spacecraft to return to Earth. But unfortunately, a final malfunction occurred. The parachute that was supposed to open to help him land did not open, and the result was that the spacecraft hit the ground hard and exploded. Major Komarov died, and the Soviet Union lost one of its most brilliant astronauts. I feel, my friend, that you are afraid. Don't be. Let me reassure you that these are rare events. Today, spaceflight is very safe, so you can go on your trip without worrying. But what you should worry about is the length of the flight, which may take months and sometimes may exceed a year, which affects the health condition of the astronaut. For example, with the disappearance of gravity, the effect of the human body's weight on his muscles and bones decreases, and thus the brain begins to direct calcium and nutrients to places other than the bones and muscles, so the body begins to lose muscle and decrease bone density. There are studies that say that astronauts who perform missions for a period longer than 6 months are exposed to bone loss equivalent to 20 years on Earth, which means a loss of 15% to 20% of bone density. This means that if an astronaut is 30 years old when he launches into spaceflight, will return after 6 months, and his bones are like the bones of a 50-year-old person. But the good news is that the body can rebuild muscles and bones over time, but they never return as before. So the best solution to avoid muscle and bone loss is to exercise with weights. But the lack of gravity makes it an impractical idea. Therefore, astronauts use treadmill to exercise in space, and they are attached to the treadmill with ropes to keep the astronauts on them, and they use resistance bands instead of weights. This is one of the health effects, but not all of them. There are effects on blood pressure, body fluids, balance, and more. The length of the trip not only has an impact on the human body, but also on his psychological state. The astronaut remains isolated with 1 or 2 people in a narrow place for long periods, and this creates a psychological state that scientists call irrational antagonism. This means that if you stay in isolation for longer than a month and a half with someone, you will find yourself feuding with this person without any logical reason, and creating problems with him for ridiculous reasons, to the point that you hate that this person in front of you even breathes. In 1987, astronauts Yuri Romanenko and Alexander Levakin launched to the Mir space station on a 326-day mission. The space station was cramped and their bedroom was small. Imagine with this narrow space and the psychological pressure they were exposed to for a long time. Any wrong behavior might start a quarrel at a distance of 374 kilometers from Earth, and there was no one to intervene to stop the quarrel. Actually, it would be a disaster if anyone intervened between them, because it will be an alien. But this quarrel did not happen. Alexander was saying that Yuri was older than him in age and rank, and was the leader of the mission, and this set clear lines in the way they dealt with each other. Likewise, Yuri used a trick when feeling angry when a problem occurred. He would scold and blame the flight control center on Earth. In fact, most astronauts use this trick to vent their feelings of anger. In addition to irrational hostility, long space missions are routine and boring, and this increases psychological stress. Likewise, being away from family and friends for long periods has a major psychological impact. Sudden malfunctions in flights are a possibility, and when they occur, it may require one of the crew members to leave to repair them. It must always be connected to the spacecraft with a specific rope because due to the lack of gravity, friction, and air resistance, any simple push may throw you into space without returning. In the end, my friend, why with all these risks would someone choose such a job? It is the love of exploration with which we began the video, the curiosity to know the unknown that has led humanity to every progress it has made, from the discovery of fire to agriculture to ascension into space. And for money and fame too.